Welcome back, Netrunner fans, to part 2 of my Fear the Masses review. In this section, we're going to be looking at all the Corp cards in the pack. The first card we're looking at is a new piece of ice for HB. This is Magnet. It's 3 to res, it's 1 influence, it's a 3 strength code gate. When you res Magnet, host a program on it that is hosted on an installed piece of ice. The text box of each program hosted on Magnet is blank. Then it has one sub, which is End the Run. You should be immediately thinking of Parasite when you see this card, and that's pretty obviously what this is designed to do. This is sort of a soft counter where it's a useful piece of ice that does something like it ends the run. It's a cheap code gate. It's actually really cost effective given that it's kind of a silver bullet card. 3 strength for 3 res cost with End the Run, that's pretty good, even if it didn't have any other text. And the fact that it has this minor sort of soft counter to Parasite is going to be really nice. I strongly prefer soft counters to hard counters, and I think this is a really good way to add more ice to the pool that have some abilities against Parasite, while just being a decent End the Run ice that you can put into virtually any deck. I expect this to see play right out of the pack as maybe a 1 or 2 of. It's going to replace some of the other more generic End the Run code gates or maybe even other types that you were playing. And I think this is just a nice addition to the HB arsenal. The next card that we have is a new HB operation. This is Lateral Growth. It's 2 to play, it's 2 influence, it's a transaction. Gain 4. You may install 1 card paying the install cost. If you've watched a lot of my reviews, you know that some of the cards that get me the most excited are not exactly the most sexy, most exciting, groundbreaking things ever printed. This is definitely the type of thing that I get excited about, while it's certainly not the most unique effect we've ever seen. We have a lot of these lower end economy effects in HB, but I think this one fills quite a few gaps that I'd like to see filled. First of all, it's another transaction for the core set Wayland. And I think we've really for a long time needed more of those, just so that the faction it's more competitive with something like Blue Sun. Now this is also decent with Engineering the Future, because you're going to get that extra 1 credit, so you're going to net 3 credits plus an install, instead of just 2 plus the install. This could also be potentially pretty good if it's in a deck with Jeeves model Bioroids. I think a lot of times we've been looking for something to pair with Shipment from Sansan in that deck. With this, we could use it click 1 to install an agenda. We're going to get the credits out of it. Then we can Shipment from Sansan that agenda. That'll be 3 clicks spent on operations. So we'll get another click from Jeeves model Bioroid, and now we have the ability to advance the agenda, the last one, and then score it. I really like this. This is smart design. I expect this to see a little bit of play. It's certainly not going to revolutionize any deck, but I definitely think it's good enough to see a little bit of play, especially out of ETF. Next up, we have a new agenda for Jinteki. This is Improved Protein Source. It's a 4 for 3. It's a research subtype. When Improved Protein Source is scored or stolen, the runner gains 4 credits. Here's the first 4 for 3 that we've ever seen in Netrunner, and it's also one with a disadvantage, since it's only 4 advancement instead of 5. I think this card immediately proves how weak 3-point agendas in your deck are. I certainly don't see this as being much better than most 5 for 3s, but it comes with all of the risk plus a little bit of playing a 5 for 3. So you still have to worry about the runner just snapping this out of R&D or HQ, and all of a sudden they're nearly halfway to winning the game. And on top of that, insult to injury, they're going to get 4 credits. There might be a few ways that we could kind of cheese this out and take advantage of its 4 advancement requirement. We could maybe use the biotech with the 4 advancement ability. That would be a way to go from it being installed to scored all in one move. But if you're going to do that, I think it's better to just score a Nisei, since that is just has a powerful effect associated with it. I don't know. I don't think this is going to really see much play, but I like the idea of having some of these interesting alternative agenda formats. And I think that this is pretty obviously proves that 3-point agendas are a huge liability in your deck. And even when they cost one less advancement counter, they're just really not that great. Next up, we have a new operation for Jinteki. This is Voter Intimidation. It's 1 to play, it's 2 influence, it's Gray Ops, and it's Psi. Play only if there's an agenda in the runner's score area. Play the Psi game. If you win, trash 1 resource. It's pretty difficult to trash resources with operations, so having a new way to do that is pretty awesome. We've seen a fair amount of play out of Snatch and Grab as a solution to like Film Critic and a bunch of other really critical connections that decks play. This can trash non-connections even, so you'd be able to trash their wild side or whatever. That's pretty good. This kind of reminds me of Cerebral Casts, which I don't think has really seen very much play. This certainly has a better impact if you win the Psi game, but I do think that operations where you have to win a Psi game, you're going to be putting a card in your deck that's going to occasionally not work, that's a pretty huge liability. So it seems to me if you're playing this, you're probably playing it as a way to destroy a certain resource that you're worried about. This is okay. I think it might see a little bit of play because trashing resources is so hard to do, but it is really conditional, and you have to win the Psi game. I think that's going to keep it out of most decks. Next up is a new ID for NBN. This is Harish Chandra Entertainment, where you're the star. It's a 45-17, and it's a division subtype. If the runner is tagged, he or she plays with his or her grip revealed. Not really sure why this is 17 influence. I felt the same way about Near Earth Hub. Now, other than that, I really like this ID. I think the surveillance aspect of NBN is one that we've been seeing played up a lot more lately, and that interacts really well with the name a card effects. Those are really cool and interesting. I think Salem's Hospitality is going to see quite a bit of play. And those cards are obviously a lot better if you can just look at the runner's grip and know exactly what they have. Now, the runner does have to be tagged to get this effect, but that's really easy to do in NBN. We have all the ice, we have mid-season replacements, we have ways to temporarily tag the runner where we'll be able to look at their grip and just remember what they have and then later play our name a card effect. I really like this. I think this is a very interesting ID, and this is the kind of thing I like to see. It's a game state-based effect that's going to give you information, not necessarily just some kind of, generic credit advantage or whatnot. Next up is a new asset for NBN. This is Full Immersion Rec Studio. It's 2 to res, 3 to trash, it's 4 influence. It's a facility. Full Immersion Rec Studio can host up to 2 assets and or agendas. The trash cost of Full Immersion Rec Studio is increased by 3 for each card hosted on it. I find this card kind of puzzling, especially out of NBN. The immediate comparison I have is to Worlds Plaza, which I don't think has really seen a whole ton of play. Now this can host agendas, which Worlds Plaza cannot do, and it has the trash cost thing. I could maybe see this kind of like I thought with World Plaza, where it would allow you to have one server where you hold all your stuff and defend, and you wouldn't have to defend as many servers with ice. You kind of consolidate. But I don't know how many NBN decks really are doing that. We've seen sort of NBN Glacier emerging as an archetype lately, and I think this card is probably most well suited for that kind of deck. The only other thing I can think of is like a mass asset sort of style, but I think if you're going to do that out of NBN, this card's really not going to help you. You want to use Near Earth Hub, and this is just not going to help you create those new remote servers to draw the card. So I see this maybe as an option in NBN Glacier, but I don't really see it outside of that. Next up is a new asset for NBN. This is Ibrahim Salem. He's 2 to res, 5 to trash, he's 3 influence, and he's unique. He's Alliance and a character. Alliance is he costs 0 influence if you have 6 or more non-Alliance NBN cards in your deck. As an additional cost to res him, forfeit an agenda. When your turn begins, name a card type, look at the runner's grip, and trash 1 card in it of the name type. This is right in line with the surveillance thing I was talking about earlier, and this one allows you to name a card type instead of just a specific card. That's obviously a lot stronger, especially if you're working on no information. You're going to probably pretty often hit based on what deck you're playing against. Just naming event is probably going to be a fair bet a lot of times. Forfeiting an agenda to res this, though, that sucks. Now, in NBN, we have a lot of fodder agendas, whether it's breaking news or 15 minutes or whatnot. We have these cheap agendas that we can easily forfeit, but we don't want to. Especially for this card effect, I feel like it's just not going to be worth it to forfeit an agenda in a lot of situations. If you could somehow get around that, like resing it, ignoring the cost or whatnot, I think this would be a lot stronger. But I don't see an easy way to do that in NBN, and I'm not sure where you would play this card outside of NBN, except maybe in like a Wayland Scorch deck trying to hit I've Had Worse, and if you're going to do that, you could just play Salem's Hospitality instead. Next up, we have an upgrade for NBN. This is Navi Mumbai City Grid. It's 2 to res, 3 to trash, it's 2 influence. It's a region. During a run on this server, the runner cannot use paid abilities on non-icebreaker cards. Limit 1 region per server. This is an interesting card, mainly because there's no way to really do this same effect. I could see this being kind of okay. There's a lot of non-icebreaker things that runners like to use during a run. You know, you're talking about SMC, Clone Chip, Data Sucker. David isn't an icebreaker, so this would actually stop David. Trying to deal with like a res toll booth without having access to some of the cards I just named certainly makes it a lot trickier. And I think maybe like a Glaciary style NBN could utilize this pretty effectively, since we already have one of the best big high-end ice in the game, and there's already a lot of other good ice in the faction. I could maybe see this seeing play as like a 1 or 2 of in a deck like that. Next up is a new asset for Wayland. This is Zealous Judge. It's 2 to res, 2 to trash, and it's 2 influence. It's a character. Zealous Judge can only be resed if the runner is tagged. Click, credit, give the runner a tag. This is pretty obviously good, and I expect to see some play right away, especially out of the mass asset style. The big thing with this is that once you get it resed, you're going to have a tag mechanism until they deal with it. And you don't necessarily have to res it and then immediately use it. You know, so you could res it at a time when they're tagged and then later use it to give them a tag, even if they've removed the tag they had previously. Now, it also gives you a way to entrench your position if you get them tagged. So you can get them tagged, use this a couple times, and give them more tags so it's harder for them to deal with it. On top of that, you can easily tutor this up. If you use Mumbad City Hall and then tutor up Executive Search Firm with that, Executive Search Firm will give you a way to tutor up the Zealous Judge. So you can pretty easily chain together enough stuff where you'll always have access to this as like a one of in your deck. In or out of the mass asset deck, I definitely expect this to see play. I think your standard Wayland tag and bag, consider it. Sync might want it because it's harder to deal with the tags. I think there's a lot of options for this card. It's just going to be a powerful new tag tool that I think is going to fit in a pretty wide range of decks using tags. Next up is a new operation for Wayland. This is Election Day. It's 0 to play, it's 2 influence. Trash all cards in HQ, minimum of 1. Draw 5 cards. I'm not seeing a whole ton of appeal with this. Maybe you could use this as like a way to fuel a deck that's playing out its hand. Like if you're playing a deck that has a ton of assets and you're installing them all, You're going to pretty often have a low number of cards in your hand. You could use this just as a draw mechanism. The obvious liability with this is you have to trash all the cards. So if you have an agenda there, you're going to have archives defended. And drawing cards is something we can do with other card effects, and I don't think is really all that great. So I don't know. I don't see this seeing a whole lot of play. Maybe in the future, if there's a reason to fill up our archives with something, or a deck that's just playing out its hand a lot and needs a bunch of draw is like the main deck, this could be better. But I just don't see that really being the case now. Next up is another operation for Wayland. This is Subcontract. It's 0 to play, it's 3 influence, it's Gray Ops. Play only if the runner is tagged. Play up to 2 operations from HQ, paying all costs, resolving them one at a time. I have a feeling that most Wayland players immediately know which 2 operations they're looking to play with this card. This seems like a pretty obvious way to consolidate double Scorched Earth into one click, and you have to have them tagged in order to play the Scorched Earth anyway, so the play only if tagged is really not much of a requirement there. I struggle with coming up with a use for this outside of that context though. I definitely think your Wayland Scorched Earth or a variety of Scorched Earth decks that use that as their finisher are going to want to consider 1 or 2 of these, because it's going to make it a lot easier to do the triple Scorch finish and things like that. But other than that, I think this is probably not going to see much play. The last card in the pack is a new 3 for 2 agenda. It's neutral, it's called Merger, and it's 1 influence. It's an expansion subtype. Merger is worth 1 additional agenda point while it's in the runner's score area. I have to admit that I'm kind of floored with there being a new 3 for 2 agenda. I really thought we had seen the last of those outside of maybe like unique ones or something like that. But this is a pretty clear indicator to me that 3 for 2s are headed in the right direction. First of all, this card probably wouldn't exist if the intention was to reprint a lot of the 3 for 2s post-rotation. I don't really think this card makes a lot of sense if you're still fighting against like Beal and Project Atlas and Vitruvius and all that kind of stuff. Early in Netrunner, there were a bunch of 3 for 2s printed, and I've said before I think that's a mistake. There just are too many 3 for 2 agendas. They're too easy to score. It makes it so that 5 for 3s and 4 for 2s don't see as much play. I've argued before that if there was a blank 3 for 2, like it was just a 3 for 2 with no text, that would see play in a lot of decks. And that's kind of effectively the way that some of the 3 for 2s are used. Like a lot of times Beal is not overscored unless you're using like psychographics or you just happen to get a scoring window or something. Now this demonstrates that it seems that the design team knows that the blank 3 for 2 thing is a problem. That 3 for 2 is too strong, almost in a vacuum, kind of irrespective of what the card does or says. It's hard to make an agenda that has an interesting or useful effect at the 3 for 2 body, because the 2 points for 3 cost is just so insanely strong. So here's a 3 for 2 with a disadvantage. It's a drawback, and it's a pretty brutal one at that. You really don't want the runner to get one of these. I've said before that 3-pointers in your deck is a big liability, and this is a 3-pointer that you don't even get 3 when you score it. Now that said, you can score this because it's a 3 for 2, whereas a 5 for 3 is pretty hard to score. I'm really curious to see if Fast Advance eventually has to adopt a card like this. That's certainly not going to happen until post-rotation, and I think this card's probably going to sit in your box until rotation occurs, because you already have other 3 for 2s to replace this. But this is an interesting card. I think this is definitely a step in the right direction with agenda design, if this sets the sort of standard that we're going to see out of 3 for 2s in the future. That's going to do it for my Fear the Masses review. I definitely feel like Corp got the better half of this pack. There's some interesting stuff on the runner side, but nothing that I think is really going to blow away the tournament scene, whereas the Corp has a lot of interesting new tools to mess around with in this pack. I think there's a pretty wide range of playables in here, and we're seeing a lot of tricky new cards that challenge our expectations, and I think that's kind of been a mark of the whole cycle. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, be sure to subscribe and give me a thumbs up, and let me know what cards you agree or disagree about in the comments. I'll see you soon for some more Netrunner stuff.